this short Edpuzzle for Assignment 5 and Edpuzzle 5, we're going to cover curriculum vitas, or a CV, as I'm going to refer to it throughout the rest of this module and the rest of this Edpuzzle. So all of the information that's contained in this Edpuzzle is located in page format in notes in the module. And so everything that you see here, you can simply go to the module and print out and use all of these resources, instructions, and information to complete your assignment for this week. And so this is the first week. Well, I guess last week was our first week technically doing our professional development activities, where you interviewed someone within a field of your interest. This week, we're actually going to start preparing some materials that you all can use when you enter the job market or graduate school applications. And so this week we start with our CV, which, as you'll find out in a second, is very similar to a resume. And then in the following weeks, we will also be working on personal statements and cover letters and things like that that you can directly use after you get feedback from me and have really nice, polished, revised drafts going forward throughout the rest of your degree and after you graduate. So curriculum vita, as I mentioned, is similar to a resume. And oftentimes I will have people actually submit resumes for this assignment, but that's a big mistake because they have some really key differences. A CV is going to focus on and highlight your educational experience. And usually we would use a CV when we're applying to things like graduate school or any jobs that are in the field of psychology, medicine, academia, or research. And so any type of job that you would be getting using your bachelor's in psychology that's relevant to that degree, you're going to use a CV for. And then, of course, if you apply to graduate school after you graduate, you would also be using a CV as well. So what's the real difference between a CV and a resume? Well, the biggest thing is the focus of the content for a CV versus a resume. CV is credential-based, meaning that we lead with your educational information, and we really focus on that. Whereas a resume is more competency-based, and so you're showing that you're competent in a number of different areas, and so you will list all of your job experience that you have, regardless of where it is usually, or what the experience is in. For a curriculum vita, we really only focus on educational information and any relevant experience and credentials that's relevant to that field. So we're going to filter out all the stuff that's irrelevant, whereas with a resume, you would want to list as many things and as many previous jobs as possible, going back all the way into your first employment. And so usually, a CV is going to be longer than a resume because you're covering a lot of things educationally that you wouldn't cover in a resume, such as all your GPAs, any type of memberships you have in the school, and a number of other things. At this point, your resume might actually look longer than your CV because you've probably had a lot more work experience up to this point than you have educational or relevant educational experience. But typically, say for my CV is about 5 pages long because we end up putting all of the experiences that we've had within school and things that are relevant to that. Whereas my resume might only be 2 pages long because I've only had 6 jobs outside of school. So as I said, a CV includes extensive information about your education and relevant experience. And another difference is that CVs are less pretty than resumes, and they're a little bit more academic looking. And so they're going to look kind of like APA format. Whereas with a resume, oftentimes we want them to be kind of catchy looking. We might use a template that's generated in a template generator or in Word or something like that. Make it a little bit flashy to get people's attention. And a CV, that's actually a negative thing, and we want to avoid doing that. And I'll tell you why in a little bit. So let's take a look at what the differences between a CV and a resume might look like before we get into some more detail about the content for an actual CV. So these would be 2 resumes. So you'll see over here, both of these are using resume templates that are provided in Word. And again, we don't want to do that with a CV. You see that these are a little flashy, we start with personal information, of course, and then generally a resume will also have some type of objective or goal. Sometimes those end up looking like paragraphs at the beginning, and those are definitely things we want to avoid when we submit a CV. You want to consider that this person that's getting your CV is reviewing a lot of them. If you're going to graduate school admissions or applying for a competitive job, they're probably going through at least 50 CVs and looking through them. The last thing they want to do when they're looking at this many CVs is start with a long paragraph that they have to read before they can get to any content. The CV should be there so someone can quickly reference the important information about you and find it without having to sort through all this other junk. And so we want to avoid things like these objectives. You also see in these resumes that the first thing they start with is experience, because that is what's most important in a resume. It's not what's going to be most important for a CV. While they do list education here in both these resumes, there's not a whole lot of information about that education or that educational experience. You'll also see these are listing some skills here that are probably not relevant to the field of study that this person is in. And so a lot of this stuff here is going to be irrelevant in terms of a CV. So let's look and see what a CV on the flip side would look like. So as I said, they're a little bit more boring looking. But that's okay. They're not going to be flashy. It's really the content that matters and the efficiency of the design, that the information's very easy to see, very easy to find, and that there's nothing cluttering the information that we're looking for. And so on both of these, we start with, this is a 2-page one, we start with personal information. And the first thing here that we start with is the educational information, because that's the first thing we want to see. Nothing drives me more crazy when I'm reviewing CVs, which I do for this job and other jobs outside of the school, is when I have to scroll to the end of the CV to find the educational information. That's what I need to see first to make sure that people are coming from accredited universities, and they're not from like for-profit online institutions or something like that. So you're from an accredited university with a very good reputation, and so you really want to lead with that information so it's the first thing that people see. And so for this educational information here, you see we say when graduation is anticipated. No one in this class has graduated yet, and that's okay, but you should have an idea at this point what semester you're going to graduate. And so you can just say either the date through present or when your graduation is anticipated. Then you see that we offer a GPA here, the degree that you're going for, and the university. Now, any other universities that you've been to, you can list those as well. You don't have to, but generally, especially if you had a good GPA there, and it was within the last 10 or 15 years, you want to list that as well. You'll notice on these two examples that after the educational information, the content varies a little bit. There's some sections that you're going to be required to have in the CV that we'll go over in just a minute. But depending on what kind of content you have to fill a section, yours might look somewhat different. And so, for instance, you might not have made the president's or the dean's list ever or have any other type of honor or award to list here. And so in that case, you just wouldn't have one of these sections. But if you have something to put in it, you certainly want to make a section for it. And so in this one, they've highlighted some relevant coursework. They have a relevant experience to list that's relevant to their degree. So this was some research experience, which is really important. They have specific interests. They do have honors and awards here, and then references. So same thing here. They had some university involvement with the psychology club, so that was a good section to have here. And so we see that these are very plainly formatted. We're essentially just separating information with headings here, lines. This is actually using tables to help separate information from the dates, and just bolded text and spacing to help separate information without anything fluffy or pretty. Same thing over here. So what content should be in your CV? Well, you're required to have 5 sections in your CV, and then you need to have one additional section, and you can choose at least one additional section, and you can choose from these about which one that you're going to add, depending on which one you have content to put in. It might be that you have content to put in 3 sections, additional sections, and in that case, please do. The more information, the more credentials you have, the better, but we certainly want it all to be relevant. Again, not cluttering it up with stuff that's not directly relevant to your degree or to the job that you're going to be applying for with that degree. So we start with personal information, educational info, as you just saw, relevant experience, highlighted relevant coursework, and references. Those are sections that everyone should be able to have, with the exception of relevant experience, and we'll talk about how to make sure you have content for that section in just a second. So again, all this information is in the module for this week, but personal information is very straightforward. Your full name, address, and telephone number so they can contact you, and your email address. As I mentioned last week when we were interviewing and sending out emails, if you don't have a professional or plain sounding email address, you need to create one. No one wants to see like a funky, cute Yahoo address. It needs to be something professional here. You also want to consider, you're more than welcome to use your live.mercer address. That will remain active for 2 years after you graduate, and it's just another way to show your credential and your affiliation with the school. So that's a great one to use, but if you have a regular Google or Yahoo that just has your name or something like that, that's perfectly fine as well. So educational information. Remember, we want to lead with this information, and we really want to highlight it. You spend a lot of time and money in school, and so we're really going to make this the focus of your credentials. Also, for these types of jobs or graduate school that you would be applying for, this is the most important information for the employer, and that's really the first step that they take to filter out people. As I mentioned before, people that are coming in from for-profit universities or something like that, that's the first thing we want to see so that we can go ahead and knock that one off the list, because that's basically a no-go as far as hiring for graduate schools or jobs. So you want to list all of the programs that you've attended and degrees pursued in chronological order. And so you always want to lead, the first thing that should show up is Mercer with your anticipated graduation date and your GPA. If you have other institutions that you attended before Mercer, you can list those as well. Although if it's older than 15 years old, you can choose to include it or not, depending on how good it looks. If you did really good at that institution and you just took a break between your associates or between finishing your bachelor's, if you have a good GPA to report for that institution, it might be a good idea to include it. But if you do have something that's rather old, like 15 or 20 years old, and you didn't do particularly well at that institution, the time between now and when you did that might just be a good reason to leave out maybe that that item on your CV, so you don't have to highlight a time where you didn't do particularly well in school. And so everything needs to be associated with a date, so that throughout your entire CV, so that we can really develop a timeline for everything and see any gaps in time and where you were doing everything. So the program, the time you were there, the specific degree you were there, the institution, and where it was should all be things under each degree that you describe. And then your GPA. You can find out your GPA on your MyMercer account. Some people list both their cumulative GPA and their major GPA. If both are strong, then include both. If one's stronger than the other, then you can choose maybe to just include the strongest one. So we can kind of pick and choose a little bit which information we present, but you need to present at least one GPA, if that makes sense. You certainly don't want to lie about your GPA. They're going to have your transcript as well, so it's something that's very easy to cross-reference, and they will. So after your educational experience, you want to talk about relevant experience. And so generally, one of the things that happens when people are applying to graduate school or they are applying to, say, a job in the field of psychology, saying in some type of practice-based field, the first thing that's going to happen is you're going to get to your CV and you're making it and you're going to say, oh my gosh, I don't have any relevant experience in the field to list. I've been spending so much time and effort completing school that I haven't really had time to do anything else. And unfortunately, that's kind of expected, and the top candidates for graduate school and top candidates for these types of jobs are going to have relevant experience. And so although it is a lot to do the bachelor's degree and most likely working some other type of job to support yourself, we've got to find a way to get some relevant experience to put on your CV. If you are interested in graduate school, depending on the type of graduate school you're interested in, relevant experience is really important. That's going to be what differentiates candidates from each other. Most everyone applying to graduate school is going to have relatively good GPAs, and almost everyone's going to be from an accredited institution, except for the for-profit people that we filter out right away. So what's going to differentiate you is the amount of relevant experience. And so if you are interested in going to graduate school for, say, like a counseling-related master's or a therapy-related master's or a PsyD or a PhD in clinical psychology, the type of relevant experience that's going to be important is going to be experience within the field of practice. And so you don't have to have a job working at the front desk of a therapist office for this to count. Relevant experience might include having shadowed someone for a week that worked in an office, or doing an unpaid internship for 2 weeks over the summer with someone in a faculty member in the PsyD program or something. So it doesn't have to be paid experience. Unfortunately, a lot of the time, this relevant experience at the undergraduate level is unpaid. We have to seek out these opportunities just to get a feel for what's going on in the field. And that's actually why they want to see this type of relevant experience, to know that you've seen it, that you know what it's like, and that you are still very interested and passionate about pursuing it. For some other types of fields that might not be as practice-based, they're going to want to see research experience. And so to get that, you can simply reach out to professors. And I usually have 1 to 2 research assistants every year. Much of this relevant experience just comes from you essentially bugging people to get it, and doing those kind of cold calls and cold emails like you did in your interview to see where you can get this type of experience, and just getting whatever you can essentially that's relevant to put on your CV so that you've got something there. So it's important to, if you don't have any, seek out and get some relevant experience that you can get on your Vita. And we also, on the flip side, need to filter out the experience that is not relevant. And so, like I mentioned earlier, you don't want to list every single job that you've had under relevant experience. Unfortunately, a lot of our employment through school or before school might not be directly relevant to the job that you're applying for. And so when we're coming up with these CVs, you always need to keep your audience in mind. Where are you applying to? What skills would be relevant to that job? And that will give you an idea of what is relevant and what's important to talk about here. So say you actually had a job being an administrative assistant and you were in charge of managing a number of other assistants, and you also became proficient in Microsoft Excel and Zoom, and a number of other things that actually would be relevant to graduate school. In that case, you could list that job and make sure that you are highlighting the tasks and the performance that was relevant to what's going to be relevant for the audience that you're intending this CV for. Hoping that makes sense. But there also could be jobs that are not relevant at all, that you really can't twist to make seem relevant or important. Working at Macy's to sell shirts, or my experience going through graduate school and beforehand was bartending and serving tables. And while I could really twist that in a gimmicky way and say I was kind of giving people therapy as a bartender, that's silly and it's not directly relevant. So on my CV, when I was applying to graduate schools and to jobs, none of that's even listed. It says as if it never even happened. But what I did list when I was applying to graduate school was my previous job teaching horseback riding instructions and teaching horseback riding and volunteering with hippotherapy for special needs populations, because I was able to demonstrate skills that I had developed there that were going to be relevant to graduate school, like teaching and getting experience with these special needs populations. And so the experience that you list needs to be directly relevant to what you're applying for without having to reach so far. Like I said, trying to say that my bartending was essentially giving people therapy is too far of a reach. So for each of these items that you have, hopefully you have at least one. You would want to list your title. If you didn't have one, then just a phrase that describes your role, like a support volunteer. You want to have, again, like I said, everything needs a date or a time frame, where the experience was located, your supervisor, they would need a name and title if available, and then a description of what you did there. And again, you only want to describe the things that are relevant to what you're applying for in the CV. So you don't want to list the skills or the abilities that you were doing, like say you were you don't want to list being a makeup artist, or if you were discussing the administrative assistant role, you don't want to list things that would not be relevant, like picking up the cupcakes every Friday for the lunch for everyone, right? Those are the things you can leave off because they're not directly relevant. Another section that's an easy one for you all to have is a coursework section. And so in this section, you can highlight the relevant coursework that you've taken that's directly relevant to whatever job you're applying for. So say the CV, you're going to use it to apply for the Master's in School Counseling program here at Mercer. You might want to highlight relevant coursework that has to do with developmental psychology or psychopathology. And just go ahead and show that on your resume so it's right up there, and on your CV, so it's right up there and easy to see. Now, obviously, some coursework is not going to be worth highlighting, like your introductory psychology class, which everyone's taken, or your history and systems of psychology, which everyone's taken. You really just want to show the people that are looking at your CV which classes you've taken that are directly relevant to the position that you are applying for. So again, there's some other sections that you can have on there. You might have some relevant skills that you want to list. So QuickBooks would not be a relevant skill that you want to list for basically anything that has to do with a CV, but being proficient in Excel might be, or speaking a second language would be a relevant skill that you would want to list and discuss, things of that nature. A conference presentation, that is a great thing to have on your CV if you are applying to any type of graduate school. Our college, says Penfield, but our now College of Professional Advancement, has a conference every spring that you can present research at. All you simply have to do is reach out to your advisor, essentially if you're in the psychology program, and say that you want to do that, and we can help guide you through that. And so even though this is the fall and that conference presentation isn't until the spring, if you really wanted to have something to put there, you create a section and just say that you're anticipating to present at the 2020 College of Professional Advancement Research Conference in Atlanta. University service, so if you've done anything for the university, this includes being an officer on our psychology club or on any other school-affiliated group. It's another good thing to show that you have taken it upon yourself to become one with the university and kind of contribute. Honors and awards is a good one to have. Many of you have been inducted into honor societies, or have been the dean's list or the president's list, or have received scholarships or fellowships. or have gotten an outstanding psychology student award or something of that nature. And so that's a great section to have if you have anything that you can put under it. And then professional affiliations. And so that would include things like being a member of the American Psychological Association, or any type of professional or academic organizations that are relevant to the area that you're applying to. Now, the one thing about this is that oftentimes it costs money to become members of professional organizations. I believe becoming a student member of APA is $50. If you are seriously applying to graduate school, I highly recommend taking the $50 and becoming a member. It's a membership for a year. And so you would want to apply and become a member the year that you're going to submit your application. But there are other organizations that you can seek out online that would be relevant and are free to join. For instance, when I was building up my vita for this job, I joined the Cognitive Science Society of Women. And so that's a very relevant society to join that's looking at cognitive science, that's based in educational psychology, and that one was actually free to join. So all I had to do was fill out the form online in order to be able to add it to my vita. So as I said in the beginning, your vita is probably going to look skimpy when you first start doing it. And that's important feedback for you to have if there's nothing on there and you're applying to graduate school or you want to apply to a job in the field afterwards, that wherever you're needing information, you need to seek that stuff out. You need to seek out that relevant experience and take the initiative, or you need to seek out becoming a part of our psychology club or trying to present at our conference or doing any number of these things that will add on above and beyond just obtaining your bachelor's. Even though it's looking skimpy right now, depending on when you're applying to graduate school or jobs, you'll have some time to start building it up and you can start working on getting more content in there, but certainly do not make stuff up. And don't elaborate on fluff to take up space or try to add things in there or tweak things to make them relevant when they aren't really. It's just really annoying when we're filtering through so many applications and CVs to have time taken up by trying to filter through some people's fluff that they use. It's essentially just a time waster. And so that's an immediate pet peeve and essentially an immediate no-go that would cause me to throw a vita right in the trash. As I mentioned in the beginning, you also don't want to put any paragraph about objectives or goals or whatever up at the beginning. I don't want to read any paragraphs at all, honestly. You could have some sentences if under your relevant experience section or something like that where you're explaining the tasks that you've been doing. But other than that, you don't want any long-winded explanations of anything. Remember, all this information needs to be easy to find and easy to get very quickly for whoever is reviewing the CV. What you do want to do, again, is seek out relevant opportunities that you can list. And if you're applying to graduate school, say this fall, you can actually seek out things and then put them on your CV kind of in future status. So say you want to present at the research conference, you're graduating in May, and you'd really love a conference presentation to put on there, but obviously you haven't done one yet because the conference isn't until April. You can reach out to an advisor and we can come up with an idea for a research poster. We can give it a title, and then you can put it on your CV with the future date, the anticipated date of May 2020. Or you could seek out a shadowing experience that you haven't even done yet if you don't have any relevant experience. You can work on networking and seeking something out and kind of get something planned and put it in the future or anticipated date and still have it listed there. That's also really good to see. Even though you haven't done it, they can see that you're going to have done it. You're going to do it by the time you get to graduate school or you get to this job that you're hopefully entering. So listing things in future status is great. You don't want the whole thing to be in future status, but if you need some spot on your vita to fill in sections, that's certainly one way to do it, and it's not uncommon for undergraduates. There are formatting instructions specifically in the module, and I'm not going to go over them here, but the first thing, just don't use resume templates, please. I want to go ahead and point out some no-goes about some of these resumes that we saw earlier, just to keep in mind before we end the Edpuzzle. So the first thing, this is too catchy, the formatting here. Second thing, there's no home address, which they may need for things like background checks or things of that nature. And so you want to include your physical address as well. We don't need the objective here. Typically, CVs are never formatted in this too broad column way like this. Sometimes resumes are expected to be one page. CVs are not. Often they're 2 to 10 pages long. And so you just want to have it more spaced out so the information is easier to see versus trying to cram it all on one page. The skills here, none of these are relevant to psychology, and thus none of them would be relevant to a psychology CV. These are, some of these could be twists, some of these skills and previous experiences are actually relevant. But what we want to do is first lead with education, not with experience. It needs to come up here at the beginning. And then when we're talking about education, we also need some GPAs here, at least one of the GPAs here. Then the relevant experience will come after, and you would want to get rid of all of the tasks or skills that are not going to be relevant, like collecting blood. Recording patients' medical history might be relevant, but collecting blood is not going to be relevant. Interviewing patients might be relevant, but performing x-rays might not be relevant. So that just really depends on the audience that you're intending the CV for. Over here, we have similar feedback. Again, we need to lead with the education here at the beginning. We don't want to try to clutter everything on one page. It needs to be really nice and spaced out so we can see all the different types of information and just use more than one page. Again, not all these skills here are relevant. And this is kind of messy to look at and hard to read. And so just little formatting nuances like that are going to be somewhat annoying. Again, this is what the better example looks like. So all the other notes and things that you need to complete the assignment are in the module for this week. Again, this is going to be an assignment that we revise and turn back in the final week. And that way you can get feedback from me and we can work on it a little bit to make sure you've got a really good final draft of the CV that you can use going forward after this class.